Center for Bioethics and Medical Humanity atau CBMH merupakan bagian dari Fakultas Kedokteran, Kesehatan Masyarakat dan Keperawatan Universitas Gadjah Mada. Sebagai bagian dari perguruan tinggi ini, kami mengemban tanggung jawab untuk melaksanakan Tridharma perguruan tinggi. Kolaborasi nasional dan internasional merupakan kunci dalam melaksanakan Tridharma tersebut. Melalui kolaborasi ini pula, CBMH dapat bertransformasi menjadi sebuah pusat pengembangan ilmu bioetika dan humaniora kedokteran dan membidani lahirnya program Master Bioetika. CBMH dapat bertransformasi menjadi sebuah
Manusia kini berada dalam era kemajuan teknologi dan ilmu kedokteran yang begitu pesat. Gelombang pandemi COVID-19, transformasi kesehatan digital, artificial intelligence, rekayasa genetik, hingga perubahan iklim adalah fenomena yang sedang kita jumpai saat ini dan masa depan. Kondisi tersebut memberikan pelajaran dan manfaat kepada manusia, sekaligus tantangan yang dapat mengancam keberlanjutan lingkungan hidup, otonomi, hingga keadilan sosial.
Seringkali kita tidak bisa menjawab atau tidak yakin dengan jawaban atas pertanyaan apa yang akan kita lakukan ketika dihadapkan pada dilema moral maupun dilema etik. Dilema moral maupun dilema etik adalah ketika kita dihadapkan pada pilihan, 2 atau 3 pilihan atau lebih pilihan yang sama-sama baik maupun sama-sama buruk. Dilema etik dan dilema moral ini selalu ada di dalam setiap ilmu maupun profesi. Hanya para profesional yang memahami ilmu bioetika inilah yang dapat menjawab pertanyaan tentang dilema etik dan moral yang baik.
Program Studi Magister Bioetika adalah program yang dirancang untuk membuka perspektif peserta didik untuk belajar tentang prinsip-prinsip etika dan menjawab dilema moral yang terjadi di era modern seperti saat ini. Ilmu bioetika dapat memberikan pandangan etis berdasarkan berbagai teori dan konsep yang dapat diimplementasikan untuk mencari solusi terbaik dari sebuah dilema etika dalam bidang kesehatan, pendidikan, riset, dan bahkan konteks sosial ekonomi yang lebih luas. Mahasiswa dibekali dengan pengetahuan mendalam mengenai pertimbangan moral dengan pendekatan multidisiplin dari berbagai keilmuan, seperti filosofi, ekonomi, sosial budaya, lingkungan, kedokteran, kesehatan, teknologi, hukum, dan profesionalisme.
Bioetika itu sebenarnya satu perkembangan dari berbagai ilmu. Di antaranya ada biologi, kedokteran, kesehatan, bioteknologi, humaniora, hukum, ekonomi, itu semuanya ada di sana. Jadi dengan demikian perkembangan bioetika ini mestinya etika kehidupan dari berbagai bidang, sehingga lulusan-lulusannya itu di dalam pendidikan tidak hanya pinter, terampil, tetapi juga etis. Kira-kira secara singkatnya tujuan utamanya adalah itu.
Mata kuliah yang ditawarkan kepada mahasiswa telah dimutakhirkan dengan memperhatikan kebutuhan mahasiswa, profesi, perkembangan pengetahuan, dan kemajuan zaman. Kurikulum pendidikan didesain untuk dapat memberikan pemahaman mendalam mengenai dasar-dasar etika dan bioetika hak asasi manusia, kesehatan masyarakat, kebijakan, etika klinis, penerapan teknologi kedokteran, metode penelitian, dan isu-isu terbaru di bidang bioetika. Terdapat 3 jalur untuk mendaftar menjadi mahasiswa. Jalur pertama adalah jalur reguler, di mana mahasiswa melengkapi total 42 SKS selama 3-4 semester. Jalur kedua adalah jalur Master by Research, di mana perkuliahan berpusat pada kegiatan penelitian dengan total 40 SKS selama 3 semester. Jalur ketiga adalah jalur khusus HELP, yang diperuntukkan bagi alumni atau peserta kursus bioetika bersertifikat. Melalui jalur ini, mahasiswa dapat melakukan transfer kredit sebesar maksimal 12 SKS. Untuk menunjang perkuliahan, Prodi Bioetika menerapkan blended learning yang menggabungkan perkuliahan tatap muka dengan media pembelajaran berbasis IT. Selain itu, mahasiswa juga diberi kesempatan untuk melakukan kunjungan langsung ke fasilitas penunjang perkuliahan maupun terlibat dalam kegiatan penelitian dan pengabdian masyarakat. Peluang karir yang dapat digeluti antara lain pendidik, dosen, konsultan kebijakan publik di lembaga pemerintahan, jurnalis, konsultan kebijakan di perusahaan swasta maupun lembaga non-pemerintah, peneliti ahli bidang bioetika, konsultan etika di pelayanan publik, konsultan di komite etik rumah sakit atau penelitian, dan banyak lagi peluang karir lainnya.
Saya Dr. Sigit Kirana Lintang Bima, alumni program studi Magister Bioetika UGM angkatan pertama. Menurut saya, bioetika adalah ilmu yang penting dan unik. Kenapa unik? Karena bioetika ini selalu membuat kita berpikir, bukan hanya tentang mana yang benar dan salah, tetapi kenapa hal itu dilakukan. Jadi kita selalu diajari untuk berpikir kritis. Semua itu tidak akan bisa saya dapatkan tanpa disertai bimbingan dari dosen-dosen saya yang luar biasa di program studi Magister Bioetika. Bagi saya, yang terpenting adalah bahwa belajar bioetika itu tidak hanya menunjang pekerjaan saya sebagai dosen, tapi juga bermanfaat dalam kehidupan pribadi saya dan selalu berusaha untuk menjadikan saya menjadi manusia yang lebih baik. Terima kasih.
Bergabunglah bersama Prodi Bioetika untuk menjadi ahli bioetika yang mempunyai kepekaan sosial yang tinggi dan menjadi inspirasi bagi masyarakat.
Kalau ada satu pertanyaan, apa sebenarnya bioetika itu? Bioetika itu berkembang dari waktu ke waktu. Yang tadinya etika menjadi biomedical ethics, oleh karena yang banyak menggunakan etika itu kedokteran, medical tadi. Namun demikian sebenarnya pada saat ini yang tidak etis itu tidak hanya kedokteran saja, bisa terjadi di hampir semua bidang ilmu. Sehingga dengan demikian dari biomedical ethics tadi berkembang menjadi bioetika, kemudian global bioethics, ya. Dan yang terakhir yang kita kembangkan di sini apa yang kita sebut dengan the new sense of bioethics. Ini pun saya mengembangkan ini distimulasi oleh sekretaris UNESCO yang di Paris. Pertanyaannya, Narto, kamu punya Pancasila, tolong etika itu dikembangkan ini. The new sense of bioethics itu adalah satu studi dari transdisciplinary subject, biologi dan seterusnya, ya. Ada sosiologi, ada economics, ada politik, language, bahkan arts, and is studying of human behavior untuk memiliki in having a new tolerance on transdisciplinary attitude. Apa itu artinya? Memang ada keterangan lebih lanjut, tapi itu setidak-tidaknya batasan dari new sense of ethics. Tadinya itu respect for person, beneficence, dan justice. 3. Berkembang menjadi 4. Respect for autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, dan justice. Nah, dengan the new sense of ethics ini, respect for others itu berarti respect pada antar orang dengan hewan, antar orang dengan tumbuh-tumbuhan maupun lingkungan. Ya, jadi dengan demikian respect for others itu ada artinya tersendiri, berkembang lagi. Beneficent, non-maleficent, yang kita tambahkan di situ adalah tidak hanya justice, tetapi it should be social justice for all. Itulah Pancasila.
Good afternoon, everyone. Selamat siang, Bapak dan Ibu yang kami hormati, para peserta dan penggiat bioetika di seluruh Indonesia dan juga di jejaring kami. Saya izin menyapa dalam bahasa Indonesia dahulu, kemudian nanti kita akan menyapa dalam bahasa Inggris. Selamat datang untuk siang hari ini pada Bapak dan Ibu peserta yang kami hormati dalam acara rutin Forum Rabuan yang diselenggarakan oleh Center for Bioethics and Medical Humanities, Faculty of Medicine and Public Health and Nursing, Universitas Gadjah Mada. Hari ini adalah sesi Rabuan yang merupakan kolaborasi secara internasional dengan International Medical University Malaysia, Center for Bioethics and Humanities. Jadi untuk hari ini kita mengambil tema khusus Student Empowerment, Professionalism, and Ethical Responsiveness, dan kita akan ditemani oleh narasumber Dr. Serena In dari International Medical University Malaysia. Juga ditemani oleh saya, Wika Hartanti, sebagai moderator acara pada siang hari ini yang akan kita lalui kurang lebih selama 1,5 sampai 2 jam. Nanti kita mungkin akan bisa memiliki waktu untuk menyimak dan berdiskusi maksimal hingga pukul 3 sore hari ini. Acara ini juga didukung atau disupport oleh Project UNESCO Chair in Bioethics Universitas Gadjah Mada dan juga kolaborasi bersama partner kita dari International Medical University Malaysia. So I would like to also greet the audiences in English, because this is one of the sessions that we routinely deliver as part of the international collaboration. So we're going to also facilitate and use the English in our session. And so we welcome you, our participants and our networks in bioethics and medical ethics around the region. And welcome to our Rabuan session, which is a routine bioethics forum that is delivered in support of the Universitas Gadjah Mada, UNESCO Chair Bioethics Universitas Gadjah Mada, And also today, this is part of the routine collaboration session with the International Medical University from Malaysia. And today we are going to be accompanied by one of the speakers, one of the experts from the International Medical University Malaysia, Dr. Serena In. And we will be discussing about student empowerment, professionalism, and ethical responsiveness. We will have around 1.5 until 2 hours. So approximately, we will be having our session until 3 p.m. maximum. And I will be facilitating the session. So my name is Wika Hartanti from the Center for Bioethics and Medical Humanities from UGM. And we shall have a great discussion today with our speakers. And so first of all, before I proceed in introducing our speaker today, I would like to invite all the audiences and the participants, if you would have a discussion and share your thoughts or comments, please feel free to write in the chat, or maybe if you wish to open the mic, then we will invite you during our discussion time later after the lecture from Dr. Serena. But if during the lecture session, if Dr. Serena or we can also invite you, please feel free to share your thoughts when we invite you to comment or engage during the session. And I will try to facilitate the discussion both in Bahasa and also in English, because we do have multiple varieties of audiences today from Indonesia and as well as our international participants. So please be comfortable and let's enjoy the discussion and the session today. And so I would like to start by greeting our speaker today, Dr. Serena. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, thank you for joining us today, Dr. Serena.
Hi. Most
Yeah,
welcome.
so
Pleasure.
yes, it's such a pleasure to have you here with us today. And we are looking forward to hear from your experience and your expertise about the students' professionalism and ethical responsiveness. It's such a critical topics and very challenging and also important. And in our part, it's also a huge part that we are trying to advocate today in Indonesia as well. So it
Excellent.
would be, I think it will make a really important discussion today. And I would like to introduce you to our audience, especially our audience from Indonesia. I'm sure that the audience from the maybe some people I see are coming from Malaysia as well, or in other region outside Indonesia. Some of them might have already know you, but just to make sure that everybody is aware that you are here as our partners, collaborators, and also your experiences is going to really be useful for our discussion. So I would like to introduce you, maybe very shortly, but later I think Dr. Serena will be able to um, expose our audience to your experiences. So Dr. Serena has a background in psychology, and so she has her doctorate degree, the PhD from the Monash University in psychology. And currently she's the head of the department, right? From the school, the head of the department, the psychology department from School of Medicine, International Medical University. And so she's also have a lot of experiences as program director in psychology department, also numerous experiences as a lecturer, and also in clinical practice. She's a clinical psychologist, and she has also a long time experience practicing clinical psychology. So here in your CV is dated back since 2012, so it's been a long time. So I'm sure there are a lot of experiences that can be very useful so that we can discuss with our audience today. And also the external practicum supervisor since 2017 up until now. And so very Unfortunately, we have a very limited time in introducing you, but I'm sure our audiences will see your expertise and your experience engaging with your lecture. So I think without further ado, we will let Dr. Serena to share your experience, her experience, and also her expertise, and especially with the topic student empowerment, professionalism, and ethical responsiveness. And again, please feel free, Dr. Serena, if you would want to engage with the audience, maybe say hi with the audience. So this is essentially very, very flexible. So
Sure.
we can go with the flow.
All right. Thank you so much, Vika. Are you able to see my screen and hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Vika. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. And it's a privilege to be able to share a lunchtime webinar together across the seas. Yeah, I wish to meet some of you in person one day if we ever have the opportunity. So we're talking about student empowerment, but essentially we'll cover both students and the healthcare professional, okay? And we're going to zoom in on professionalism and ethical responsiveness. So my overview would be, I would cover the basis so that we're all on the same page. Secondly, I'll integrate ethical competence education into practicing it. Thirdly, we'll go through some reflective practices. And finally, we'll really zoom in to emphasize how we can empower our students for responsible ethical reporting and ethical problem solving. Okay, so since I'm told this can be somewhat interactive, I'd like to start by asking some of you, and please feel free to just share in the chat box, or you could unmute if you want, but what was your experience with when I say professionalism and ethics, yeah? Whatever that comes to your mind, what was your experience as a university student? So for some of you, it's a bit recent. For some of you, it's been a long time. But what was it like?
So does it have to be during our time, reminiscing our time during university student, or
Yes,
is it
because
okay?
yes, during
Recalling
university's
back
time. Yes, because
during
I'd like to find out from the audience what was their like initial encounters. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll also try to encourage in bahasa. So I will help the participants, Bapak dan Ibu, para peserta. Mungkin ini sebagai awalan untuk interaksi bersama Dr. Serena. Yang menarik adalah apa kemudian memori yang dimiliki Bapak dan Ibu kalau mendengar kata-kata profesionalisme dan etik gitu. Tapi zaman dulu pada saat kita masih mahasiswa atau pada saat kita menjadi peserta didik gitu ya di universitas. Ya mungkin itu yang menjadi hal yang akan menarik ya. Kalau sekarang mungkin kita semua yang ada di sini sudah sangat tertarik dan committed dengan topik ini, tapi kan yang menarik adalah merecall lagi pada saat dulu kita masih peserta didik apa ya impresi kita mungkin atau memori kita kalau dengar kata-kata profesionalisme dan etik. Silahkan bisa ditulis di chat box atau mungkin juga apabila ada yang langsung ingin share beberapa kata singkat, bisa unmute, bisa raise hand. Yeah, so I was encouraging the participants and to make sure that we recall back during our time when we're students, in the university.
Maybe I can ask you first, Vika, what was your experience?
Yes, my experience. Oh, that's interesting. My experience, I know nothing. I know nothing about professionalism and ethics. Maybe I've heard about ethics, but not really professionalism. So I think this is a good question because now that I'm in this field, I see the importance that professionalism and ethics are interrelated. But back then, when I was a medical student, I don't think I'm aware about professionalism, but maybe I recall that I remember I've had several lecture sessions about ethics, but not so much about maybe professional ethics, but what I remember the most is about ethics. And my impression is that at that time, back then, that ethics deals with characters or habits. So that was my recollection.
That was it. I see.
Yeah, that was it.
Okay.
How to be a good person. Yeah.
I'm not surprised because I do hear these kind of responses as well. Yeah. Just wondering if anyone wanted to respond in the chat box.
Yeah. So I I think that we haven't seen anyone typing in the chat box, but maybe we can invite some of our participants, maybe our international participants would like to share. If you would want to unmute yourself, atau mungkin peserta dari Indonesia, kami persilahkan kalau ada yang ingin menyampaikan dalam bahasa Indonesia, nanti kita bantu untuk menyampaikan, saya bantu menjembatani dalam bahasa Inggris. Apa Bapak dan Ibu yang mungkin diingat kalau dulu zaman mahasiswa, mendengar tentang profesionalisme dan etik, atau mungkin tidak pernah mendengar, atau mungkin tidak ada kuliahnya atau lupa, or maybe we
that's
forgot,
true.
maybe some of us forgot, we don't have any collection
That's
about
right.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's okay. Maybe we have a shy audience, and we'll see if the response comes in later.
Yes.
For me, even in my undergraduate days, I think I'm very fortunate to have had a very experienced counselor who taught that subject for me, and I think it really opened my eyes to the whole world of professionalism and ethics. And that class was so stimulating, challenging, and thought-provoking. I think I'll never forget it. And that's like a good, maybe 15 years ago, back in undergraduate days. Yeah, more than 15 years ago. So almost 20 years. Yeah, but it stayed with me because it definitely triggered something in me. I would say a process of transformation. Okay, and so I hope that this mini lecture today will also be somewhat of a stimulating discussion that we'll have, that will also encourage you to have more conversations after this, yeah, that it doesn't stay as a lecture. Okay, so let's just start with some basic definitions, okay? And I have a quote here. I love this one because it is something I remind my students a lot in the supervision that I do. Yeah, sometimes they feel very uncomfortable when the majority of the people are doing something, but it's actually wrong, but they're like the odd one out. So it's just a reminder that, you know, when wrong is wrong, it's wrong. And when right is right, it's still the right way. Yeah, so something for us to think about. Okay, so let's define professionalism. Yeah, since Vika didn't remember learning it in undergrad, maybe others too. Yeah, but just to make sure we're on the same page. So based on what Stanford Medicine has in their handbook, right? Professionalism is really essentially having a commitment, right, to the highest standards of excellence that one can have in the practice of medicine. And when we generate and disseminate knowledge, that high standard of excellence is maintained. Yeah. Next, there's also a commitment to sustain the interest and welfare of patients. So in all situations, this commitment stands. And finally, it's a commitment to be responsive to the health needs of society. And as we'll see in the upcoming slides, to be responsive is a huge responsibility. Yeah. And it requires action, it requires process. It is not stagnant, it's not static. All right. So professionalism is evident in interactions. So we cannot escape it, right? All our interactions that are in the field of medical education, as most of you are, and any delivery of patient care, there is interactions and relationships between all the different people in the system, okay? So those of you who are practitioners, physicians, administrators, allied health professionals like myself, and students, we're all involved in this professionalism. None of us are exempted from it, okay? And before I move on, I also wanted to align ourselves that the whole point of talking about ethics in the first place is because we believe in having moral behavior. So moral behavior becomes a common goal and understanding that all of us, students and practitioners, have, right? So moral behavior essentially covers 4 components. Firstly, having moral sensitivity. That is when you recognize that any situation that you find yourself in does have some form of implication for the welfare of another, meaning you don't exist alone. In your profession, in your studying, in all the circumstances, any action or any thought or any behavior will have implication on someone else's welfare. Yeah. Next, moral reasoning. So we assume that because we have moral sensitivity, we also do engage in a process of thinking through different alternatives once we identified that these are the dimensions of what we want to do. Okay, so we think through what are the options. Third is moral motivation, which is what lies behind people's decision making on whether I should take this option versus that option versus that option. But it certainly involves that reasoning component, right? Having evaluated it. And finally, we assume that as part and parcel of the healthcare, education, and delivery, there is moral character involved. So we are all in the same boat, on the same side of wanting to have integrity and moral courage in our various interactions, okay? And then we come to some more, just a few more definitions so that we are all aligned. Ethical responsiveness. So ethical responsiveness is a tall order. It's quite aspirational in that it's often defined in the context of research. But throughout this lecture, I will cover mostly clinical practice, but also covering research. So these two main contexts, because many healthcare professionals and students inevitably will get involved in research or participate in research and contribute to the field of research as part of our career development and contribution back to society. So having a sense of ethical responsiveness is essential as like an umbrella, you know, like covering you as you go along. And so it only can be fulfilled if whatever intervention that we are doing or proposing and any other kind of health benefits that we are recommending is also made available to the wide population, right? Overall, we're saying that, let's say in research, if whatever the research objectives are, it should be made widely available to as many people as possible in order to maximize the value of the findings and how useful the findings of the research will be. So I'm just giving you a general concept of how important ethical responsiveness is. So why is it something we need to think about? Because in the world of research and production, there is sometimes exploitation that happens. Okay, so responsiveness actually acts to serve to counterbalance risks of any possible exploitation, right? And it's essentially trying to elevate and to put forth the value of a particular research study. And it's always about wanting to meet and promote benefits of the research or the findings to participants and communities, okay? So responsiveness will assume that let's say if it's a research project, the research findings have value, but it doesn't stop there. It's actually a dynamic process that builds upon it. What am I talking about? So as I mentioned in the earlier slide, the research considerations will need to take into account if there's any, even little possibility of exploitation of any participant or any groups of people. And so it's working towards changing things up, revising things up, editing proposals, or changing the research design, and then eventually the research execution in order to ensure that there's fairness involved and there's benefits, like I mentioned, to the population, right? And how are benefits assessed? It's done very much on a study-by-study basis, okay, depending on what type of research exactly. So this is carefully evaluated. You're looking at all the risks that you can try to predict, and then, of course, look out for anticipated benefits to not just the sponsors and investigators, but most of all, also to the needs and preferences of the host community, the participants. Ethical responsiveness cannot exist without transparency. So the entire process of responsiveness requires mechanisms that are in place to help the different, the researchers, the practitioners, or all the stakeholders involved, okay, to actually avoid any possibility to disadvantage any population than what they should. Yeah, so they shouldn't have any kind of disadvantageous or exploitation. Okay, and then coming to just recap some ethical principles. So this is from the World Health Organization, and I think nothing new to so many of us, yeah, but it's essentially recommending for the healthcare professions to have integrity, that is everyone having that same vision, mission of behaving in accordance with ethical principles, acting in good faith, having intellectual honesty and fairness. I mentioned just now, transparency is related to accountability, where professionals, students need to take responsibility for your actions, your decisions, and of course, the consequences. Thirdly, to have respect, to always respect the dignity, worth, equality, diversity, and privacy of all persons, regardless of their background, persons from all diverse communities. And finally, a professional commitment to demonstrate high level of professionalism and loyalty to the organization. This is in the context of them, but overall, if for professionals and students in the context of their organization or their institute, to display that professional commitment. And then we go to the American Medical Association's ethical principle. So again, I think it was also displayed in one of the earlier introductory videos. Yeah. So firstly, respect for autonomy. So just reminding ourselves, what is it all about? It's always about respecting our patients' rights, how they have autonomy to decide on a course of action, as long as they have the capacity to do so. Beneficence, very key on always considering the positive benefit and weighing the benefits and the risks. Why we do that? We want the best outcomes for our patients. So things that would benefit them in their best interest. At the same time, we preserve justice. So ensuring that there is always a fair distribution of scarce health resources and costs as equitably and equally as possible. Okay, and non-maleficence, simply not doing any harm. You ensure that you provide benefits and outcomes in the best interest of our patients. At the same time, we also always remember to not cause any harm from the start to the end. Okay. So why are we even having this conversation about the need to maintain professionalism and ethical responsiveness? I found a recent study that looked at this group of medical students in the UK, and they also did look at other studies prior to that. And so just some interesting findings here. The male medical students in that study somehow classified themselves as experiencing no distress, whereas females would categorize themselves as experiencing distress. What kind of distress? Moral distress, when they had difficulties with different professional dilemmas during their training. So they experienced different situations. And 55% of those students actually wrote some reflection papers, and that was analyzed. And the analysis of their reflection on this whole issue of professional dilemmas in the medical setting showed that they had somewhat resistance to lapses. Lapses here refers to when there's a unethical situation. The ethical conduct was compromised, okay? And so some of these scenarios involve, firstly, verbally challenging the perpetrator directly. So we're talking about an ethical situation where someone was a perpetrator and perhaps was in question, their behavior or their actions were in question. And then these students also reported that they were not so comfortable with reporting the perpetrator. So they firstly could not challenge the perpetrator verbally. They also had difficulty reporting the perpetrator to an authority. And then thirdly, they also, there were themes, right, shown that if the patient was the wrong person in the scenario, many of them displayed some concern, both during the situation, that means in front of the perpetrator when the perpetrator was doing that something unethical, and then following the incident. So they either stayed behind or they had to return to the scene, but they had concern, but they couldn't really show it. Yeah. And finally, they also did not have debriefing with a supportive person post-event. So these examples of incidents where the students encountered unethical situations in their training, they actually found it very difficult to do something about it, and that resulted in psychological moral distress. Okay, so when we talk about responsibility in the medical field, right, we need to take into account that reflection and knowledge must always be present. Okay, and it's not just about a personal kind of reflection, but it's consisting a consideration for the common good of all the parties, especially the patient's welfare and also all the parties involved. And so for one to take a virtuous action, right, they need to be able to choose from options that apply in each circumstance. So they need to be able to be very clear in their thinking, right, having that sense of responsibility that I need to choose the right action in this circumstance. And at the same time, there are also other possible actions that could be interfering with my decision making. And if they're not helping me, they are more harmful, I need to be able to set that aside. And we're talking about real situations of interference from, let's say, authorities, figures, or some superior, or a system that is actually having certain, policies and all that interferes, right? So it's having to maintain and uphold a sense of responsibility when you're really faced with that. Okay, so this leads me to the importance of really ensuring that our medical education, our healthcare professional education, psychology education does involve ethical competence in the syllabus, right? And it is, I find it is probably a part of many curriculum, but let's really zoom in to emphasize what are the features that are important. Okay, so a recent systematic review that looked at 40 studies globally was studied to analyze the key features and the elements of what is very important in ethical competence education and learning. Okay, so just to define ethical competence, it would include having, so maybe a good time for all of us here to reflect as we go through this list, how ethically competent are you, right? Do you have, firstly, the capability to identify ethical problems as and when they arise? Secondly, do you have the knowledge, adequate knowledge about ethical and moral aspects of care in your work, in your education? Yeah. Thirdly, are you having the ability to have regular and consistent reflection on your own knowledge and actions? Okay, I'll go into more detail soon. And finally, do you have the ability to make wise choices and carefully manage ethically challenging work situations? So these are real attributes of what it looks like to have ethical competence. Okay, so the features based on the systematic review of those 40 studies globally, the authors have summarized on the key features that are needed for ethical competence education. Okay, so a good time to also kind of have a checklist for yourself to see whether you've gone through this in your university when you were a student back then, or even if you're a student now, whether this is sort of incorporated inside. Okay, so the features, the three big areas are firstly, making sure that ethical competence learning is possible in the first place. Okay, it's a possible learning process throughout the whole curriculum. Secondly, whether it also helps people to have awareness of their own thoughts and perceptions in their training process. And finally, the ethical competence education must help a person develop the ability to know that I'm doing things right by the patient's best interest. So I'm always having that as my compass, my moral compass. Okay, so the first feature is it will consist of creating conditions for learning. Secondly, designing strategies for learning. And thirdly, it involves interacting with others. Okay, so how do we make learning possible? The first one, what kind of conditions do we need? The education for ethical competence will need to make sure that it uses real work situations. So a lot of the case studies, having taught this subject many times in the different programs and undergraduate level, many of the case studies actually are not always very real. So incorporating the real scenarios actually really make a bit of a difference. Yeah. And secondly, a key thing that I also observe, and this is what the study shown as well, you need to make adequate time for the ethical group discussions. So these conditions need to be there. You need to set the stage. If you have a group discussion and you only give the group, let's say 15 minutes, how deep can the discussion go? How meaningful can it go? So if you give participants or the students in a group or the professionals, in a group discussion, adequate time, then people actually may relax a little bit. They may actually have time and space to pause and to actually reflect. So it may seem so common sense, but actually so important. And this is what a lot of the studies showed, right? When time was not sufficient, it made the discussion superficial and perhaps not very meaningful. And sometimes students or professionals came up with textbook answers which were not so applicable in real life. Yeah, so we need to bear that in mind, that we always need to allocate adequate time. Thirdly, this condition for learning is important by ensuring that we have psychological safety, confidence, and trust. Okay, it's really not so easy to do this, but just having that as an intention, as an educator, or someone, you're a superior in your workplace, or a student leader, just ensuring that you set the stage for allowing the participants in that group discussion to feel safe psychologically. There's somewhat of a confidence in knowing that what we discuss here is safe, right? It's kept confident. And I have confidence that I'm talking with other peers who are professional, who are ethical. And so I trust this space, right? And so these features are important because it helps the participants, the students, to know that I can actually express my opinion. I can actually try. And it's so crucial that students be allowed to make blunders, make mistakes without leading to a consequence. Like, if I answer wrongly, oh no, I'll be marked down. Or even a professional, right? Sometimes professionals also don't know it all. So professionals giving the wrong answer, will they be judged by their peers, that kind of thing? So is that space for the learning and discussion actually facilitating this, trust and courage to actually open up, yeah? So the participants need to feel like they can trust one another, and just emphasizing and acknowledging that clinical practice, in the real world, and even research, right? There's bound to be ethical problems. So it's to be expected even. So talking about it, it should be normalized, okay? Next, designing the strategies for learning. So once you've created the condition and the climate for that kind of learning, the strategies, as I've mentioned, will need to have real life situations. So you definitely need to blend in some theoretical learning, but you integrate it with some practical ones where there's actual real case scenarios added in. Okay, and it can be done through workshops. So something like what we're having right now is a trigger, right, for more discussion. In your small groups, in your discussions, in your workplace, in your meetings, you get a case studies, problem-solving sessions, role play as well. Actually, role play can be really fascinating because it actually enlightens a lot of people on how they actually feel and how they may actually overreact or react in certain situations. So you have simulation activities, narratives. So narratives and storytelling, some of it could be written, some of it could be verbal, yeah, and small group discussions. So this is what is recommended by the experts in these various 40 studies, okay? And the third feature is interacting with others. So you can't really have that very meaningful ethical competence building solo. You really need to learn to process things and grow in interaction with others. So for that to happen, I mentioned just now psychological safety, right? So the open atmosphere where people feel that they can talk about things, sensitive issues are actually raised and brought up and discussed, okay? So this could again take place in the context of simulation of cases or group discussion of a specific trend or issue or concern, okay? And recognizing, right? So when you meet together to learn, it's each one recognizing that the learning will take place not just at an individual level, but also recognizing that it's this relationship, this interaction that I have with one another in that group setting will actually enhance the learning process. And so you learn together about issues that are perceived as ethically problematic from different perspectives. Some may feel it's less of a problem, some may feel it's more of a problem. So actually learning together to have a better understanding of different perspectives is very important. And not only that, this is actually another important point. It's a welcoming climate whereby contradictions are welcome. Meaning, in a group discussion, we have this social psychology concept called groupthink, whereby in a group setting, when discussions take place, sometimes it's easy for the group, because of the group dynamics, to sway towards one extreme of a decision. And it's because of the group dynamics, and people feel somewhat of a peer pressure to conform to that. So in the end, that group might reach a decision just because of that group think that happened, but it may not always be the right thing. So in a healthy and balanced kind of ethical competence training, contradictions should be welcome, right? Whereby when one or the other have differing or very extreme opinions or perceptions, it can be balanced constructively in a group. It can be taken in positively, in that it's not always something to be defended. You know, you don't necessarily have to defend yourself or attack. It's a lot about taking it in, considering, and then balancing what is the most possible right outcome, yeah, or the right thing to do. Okay, so this is not easy to do because I will say cultural implications matter here. Sometimes in certain cultures, you know, organization culture, hospital setting, sometimes that place, the norm may be to actually just conform. So it's not easy when sometimes certain individuals may actually have a differing opinion, and then it's not easy. It can be unpleasant, but it's very important to recognize that there could be differing attitudes, opinions, and it should be taken constructively. All right. Next, part of the ethical competence education is also having the awareness of, you know, your insights and emotions. So firstly, we'll cover visualizing attitudes and approaches, and then secondly, experiencing emotional conditions. How does this take place? Incorporating it in, let's say, a classroom setting or in a professional setting, you can basically get the participants, either it's a small group or a big group, yeah, to use narrative writing. And this is a healthy reflection process that helps people to identify their own attitude and other people's attitudes towards everyday healthcare situations. So it literally can look like an assignment. So if it's in a university setting, then it is given in the form of an assignment, right? If it's in a professional setting, it can be just having a group task where, okay, everybody, today this is the objective, and we'd like to see what are people's attitudes. So the writing process also stimulates and triggers another cognitive process that is important in understanding your own ethical attitude and your approach to ethical situations. Yeah. Interestingly, through the writing process, is actually where, because I mentioned cognitive process, right? So your brain is like analyzing, it is reflecting, it is confronting, some of your thoughts, your fears, your anticipations about certain things. It will actually help to promote a process of change in your own thoughts and perceptions. How does this happen? Because through your writing, then after that, in the group, you have some sharing. It actually helps people listen to other people's like innermost in-depth thoughts, right? At the same time, talking about attitudes or approaches to how ethical problems should be managed. Yeah, so this will be covered in helping people develop that awareness. Secondly, experiencing the actual emotional condition will help. So sometimes an ethics class, right? A professionalism and ethics class can be quite textbook, right? Quite dry, because it may be sterile without the emotions. So now we recommend, right? The experts recommend to insert the emotional condition in so that you actually help each person develop that ability to consider the emotions that are involved, right? Because we're human beings, and ultimately we need to pay attention to how we feel, be aware of it, and how it may impact the other person. So in discussions of ethical attitudes, approaches, actually talking about your emotions, such as, in certain cases, some trainees, some students may feel a bit more dependent, depending on their stage of training. Some may feel very, very vulnerable. And I'll say vulnerability is, again, I'm mindful and sensitive to different cultures. It's not easy to show. Sometimes there's also gender differences, right? In whether we're able to disclose to others or even allow people to see that there's a vulnerable side to us as the healthcare professional. Yeah. And then there's also a possibility of fear of abandonment, meaning if, let's say, you're the only one that stands out in the group to have a different opinion, will people actually reject you? Will people actually judge you? Yeah. And at the same time, you also admit and acknowledge that in many, many different ethical situations, you don't have a control. You can try to control, but we often actually have a lack of control. So having this dialogue of hearing each one's interpretations and reflections, as well as really expressing the emotions that they can get in touch with, they can identify, will help students and professionals to change their perspective on caregiving, and also taking into account care recipients. Essentially, we are in helping to experience these emotional conditions of ethical situations, we're also indirectly developing empathy. And empathy is such an important skill, as we all know. All right. Finally, another feature is doing right by the patients, right? To learn in every situation, in different ethical conflicts or considerations, to manage emotions and the tensions, and as well as managing the different perspectives in the situation. So many times, ethical problems actually, as I mentioned just now about emotions, it will inevitably provoke strong emotions. Okay, anger is a very, very common one, because anger can be experienced when people feel wronged, or they feel injustice, okay, or they just feel triggered, okay. Disapproval, if you are someone who has very, very high moral standards, or if you are evaluating your junior, right? You're the superior evaluating your junior, or you're the supervisor evaluating your student, yeah? And frustration with the situation that is very hopeless seeming, frustration with the system or the policies in place. So a lot of strong emotions rise up, and that causes tension, right? So in the education of ethical competence, it needs to, again, I can't emphasize it more, needs to have that inclusion of the time and space that students and professionals can reflect together and actually talk about the tensions and perceptions about these emotions. Whatever tensions that are experienced as well, just like I mentioned vulnerability, it actually needs to be verbalized, okay? And the tension can take place not necessarily just between professional to professional, yeah? Often the tension could also arise from professional and patient, or professional and patients, caregivers. So there's all these different scenarios, and it is very emotionally tense. Okay, so what then helps is being able to think about the different stages of medical and ethical reasoning and how we have to resolve the care situation. So considering all the different perspectives in that situation, all the different stakeholders, all the different caregivers, right? You know, just having that mentality that I need to always be thinking ethics, meaning you kind of have that intention every day as you wake up and you go about your career or your studies. It's just putting on that mindset that I'm going to be ethical. So it's like you assume an identity where you are always aiming to be an ethical professional, right? And problematizing one's own capabilities to judge and act. Okay, let me explain that. So having the ability to recognize that your own capabilities to judge and act can actually be a limitation. Meaning, many times people may have this bias, right? That I know I'm right. I know the best way. Or, you know, someone very senior or very experienced in the field may have that thinking. But, you know, just with thinking ethics and assuming a very humble approach to being teachable, no matter how old, senior, or experienced you are, can actually help different healthcare professionals and students to just keep their eyes open, their hearts open, okay? And ultimately, when we're able to identify the different perspectives, it will help us be more capable to see what situations where, you know, ethical values and norms have been violated. So being able to just have that multiple perspective, that empathy, that intention to be thinking ethically, and at the same time, always adopting that possibility that my capability to judge and act may be a limitation. It may actually be ill-informed. You know, I need to consider more perspectives that can help. Okay, so these features collectively will help inform to make very effective ethical competence education. Okay, now I move on to the third part where I'm just going to highlight some reflective practices, okay, on what would be helpful. Okay, so in helping us maintain high standards of professionalism, we need to use reflection-based learning. And we're not talking just in the classroom, we're really talking about every day, right? Those of you who've been practicing or, you know, professionals for years and decades, to just continue having that reflection-based learning as part and parcel of your professional identity, okay? So for students, it's from a very early stage, right? Helping them to become positively socialized into their roles. So whatever roles they're playing, they get into that orientation of their identity, of what they should portray, of what they need to do, right? And at the same time, you're cultivating, you know, the norm of helping students and professionals to process. When we say process, means you're thinking and thinking and thinking, yeah? You're not just absorbing, you're also digesting, you're processing it, you're thinking about it, you're reflecting on it, yeah? You gain perspective on and come to terms with the many, many difficulties that you encounter on the road to becoming a professional. So, like I mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, my experience in my undergraduate ethics and professionalism class really did so much for me, because I think, if I may dare say, I don't think I've stopped thinking about ethical situations from almost 20 years ago now to today, because it has really embedded in me, and I credit this to my very highly esteemed lecturer, okay, who was counselor, and so that really embedded in me that value, and this has become my passion because we all need to speak the same language, yeah? So processing and processing. And at the end of the day, this helps us become more self-aware. So we are regularly, you know, being self-aware about ourselves, about others. We are mindful. We actually stop to think. We are aware as we go along, right? That we put these two into practice. Reflection in action. So while you're in action as a student or as a healthcare professional in the different contexts that you do your work, reflection is going on. And then not just going on at the moment, right? It's also reflection on action. So post-event, post-day, post-task, you're still reflecting on what happened. And this is a commitment that we all put up, we aspire to maintain throughout our professional lives, to maintain such ethical values. Yeah. So if you can keep on having that ongoing reflection in action and on action, that should hopefully put us in the right direction and a safe place. Yeah. So for students needing some form of a structured step-by-step decision making, I'll just run through this. It's there are 6 steps, but I think different ethics textbooks will of course comment on it with varying steps. Yeah. But going through a very systematic structured approach also is helpful, right? So in the scenario you're considering, what's the ethical dilemma problem? What are the relevant facts of the case? So you notice facts, yeah, not opinions, facts. Step 3, who are the parties involved? And we're really talking about identifying every single person possibly related to the case, yeah? And not just identifying that, right? We actually have to have that ability to manage the different perspectives, right? Fourthly, what ethical principles and values are involved? So this brings in your judgment, your moral reasoning, okay? And then of course, tracking with your localized context. What do the laws, regulations say? 5th, then you start to put in your decision-making process. What are my possible choices? How can they be justified? So each one is being considered very thoroughly. Finally, what solution is best of all? Of course, we're talking best in the patient's best interest. And ultimately, what can the parties agree on? The different parties that are involved. Yeah. So finally, the last part of the lecture is about how can we continue to empower students as an ongoing process, yeah, to do responsible ethical reporting and ethical problem solving. So if you have these reflection-based learning and ongoingly, like I said, you'll be on the right track, okay? And then for students, it's actually having a culture of really empowering them over and over. So we send students the same message that, as educators, as future professionals, as current professionals, we need to be able to always have an open dialogue regarding the different ethical situations. So the open dialogue is called open because it's where professionals and students will feel safe. And I cannot emphasize this anymore, because when I've been in many discussions actually, and I've always observed the climate, and I've seen that in some settings when the culture of that organization or the culture of that setup, right, that leadership or something was not particularly open, it was very interesting how the dynamics were very stifled, and you could see professionals or students actually not really opening up. So then you can tell that's not safe, yeah? And so we need to work towards encouraging that ongoing open dialogue. So something that I think we can think about how we can encourage that. Secondly, telling and imparting to students from early on that reporting is not, it shouldn't be like a worst case scenario thing. Reporting is something we're obligated to whenever we encounter an unethical or incompetent situation or a conduct by anyone, as long as it's putting somebody at risk, right? The patient's at risk. By right, as students, as professionals, we shouldn't ever feel fear or a loss of favor. So the climate in which this whole ethical reporting thing is done or encouraged in a company or an organization, a hospital, healthcare setting, it needs to be lived out, authentically, so that people really feel like I can report this. How is this going to happen? So I happen to be part of a small team of researchers, and there's a letter written to a letter to the editor to just put forth the case that actually, because we recognize that many times people are actually discouraged, or rather they are hesitant to report. It's because of the fear, right? The fear of some form of consequence. So we recommend, me and my collaborators recommend that anonymous reporting should be made as an option most of the time, so that people who whistleblow, right, on any situation should have a safe space to communicate on any time we observed any form of unprofessionalism without reservation. So this anonymous reporting should become accessible to every level, student, healthcare professional. And it should not be, again, motivated by or influenced by fear, but it should be motivated by accountability. So students and healthcare professionals should feel like, no, in doing this reporting, my obligation is I'm being accountable to the patients. You know, I'm being honest about what's going on. And I trust the system. I trust the people who read this report will actually take it into account fairly. They will actually take action, okay? So finally, we're talking about ethical problem solving. How can we cultivate this in students? These are my recommendations, and also based on observations in the field, is always being able to consult trusted peers and supervisors. So having a system where consultation on ethical problem solving is a norm. So like, you know, having your tea time discussions, having your morning breakfast, or it's like these conversations become part and parcel of everyday conversation. So it's actually very a healthy conversation, right? And at the same time, in the problem solving, students will need to explore the possible alternatives considering multiple stakeholders' perspectives. Yeah, not just their perspective, but different angles. So they also learn to consider what are the limitations, what are the constraints of different parties, why are they not able to do this? You know, it's not just one way, but that's different, right? And of course, not forgetting, depending on which country you're in, we always have to remember in that setting that we're in, the context, we have to consider the local policies, whatever regulations and legislation that local context is in. Not forgetting international authorities' guidelines. So always having to refer to so many multiple sources of authorities on ethical guidelines and principles. And finally, this is where ethical responsiveness comes in again, where not simply assuming that whatever is already in place is like set in stone where it cannot be changed. Meaning sometimes as time goes by and maybe certain practices become a little bit more acceptable or certain practices become more scorned upon, right? It's actually considering the cultural implications, the world trends, and actually, if need be, sometimes taking that courage to put forth some steps or action to revise certain systems that are obsolete. Yeah, so this is not easy and it takes a lot of commitment, but perseverance, you know, again, motivated by honesty and trust, right, in the system to make it better. So this is where students really can step up. So in all my classes, when I'm teaching and facilitating ethical discussions, I always tell the students and the trainees, right, never look down on yourself because of your level of training or your age, because sometimes having that fresh perspective and you know, you as the generations go, like you have differences in the way you see things. So never look down on yourself in that sense. You can actually have something impactful in your considerations. Yeah. So that's why that openness to learning, that reflection, right? The reflection in session, reflection on action, all that can be practiced by both students and healthcare professionals. Okay. So in summary, I have covered the need to promote safety. Yeah. Can't highlight that anymore, but safety, psychological safety, where professionals and students feel like I can actually talk about these things. Okay, it's real life situations. I cannot recall how many times, you know, when I have these conversations with my students and they're like, oh, you mean it doesn't just happen in textbooks? It's really happening. I say, yeah, this is exactly what's happening right now. This is exactly the ethical dilemma that we're in. So students actually love it that what they're learning is really about real life, yeah, so they feel like they can safely talk about things. Secondly, just recognizing that, you know, ethical problems will never be simple, right? It's complex, it's unique, it's very uncertain, and often the situation we're in is so unpredictable. So that's why that dialogue is so important. You can talk about, collectively, you talk to discuss and, brainstorm together, right? About what's not just the patient's best interest, but you scrutinize every angle. You interpret the different scenarios, situations, and just processing every person's, the professionals, the students' knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So it's all culminated together, integrated together, right? And this can be done through that interaction with others. Like I said, if a person just thinks on their own, they can only get so far. But if they actually have that dialogue and interaction with one another, it actually allows the system, right, the training system to identify, right, whether the healthcare professional or the student actually is understanding the situation, is actually doing something in an ethical way. Yeah, so that dialoguing in a safe place helps. Okay, so my recommendations for trainees and professionals in whatever setting you are in is to actually have regular, I recommend monthly. Of course, we have to see what are your commitments. This is something I also try to incorporate in my department, yeah, to have regular monthly, we try to have monthly, but regular dialogues, right, in small groups. It's open, and you could go it by your specialization, or actually if your setting has multidisciplinary team members, it's even better, because you have to consider the different perspectives, right? Using real case studies, I have quite a lot of that through, again, real life, yeah. Sometimes it could be issue-based, right? A specific issue that a trend is happening, a pattern of behavior is happening. Sometimes it can be values-based. So talking about values, yeah, and learning points. So not just talking about stuff, but each one in that group participates in talking about what they've learned, right? Secondly, this is also so important, where if you have seniors in the field or a supervisor, someone who's been through quite a bit more experiences, they actually disclose about their actual experiences, what was done to help resolve it, and their observations. So this is where you actually bridge the gap, from textbook to real life. You really talk about the gaps, the limitations and stuff like that. So the real sharing actually adds so much value to the learning process. Okay, and finally, if there's any updates in the guidelines out there to share with one another, because sometimes people may not be updated, and of course, updating if in-house there is a protocol or a guidelines paper policy that needs to be updated. Okay, so just to share with you in IMU as well, I think over the last, I just got some evidence, there is regular debates and ethics discussion, and it's something we're proud of that we do. This is in my own department, so we have an ethics forum almost every year, and I think either once or twice a year. Yeah, so just some sample. So we talk about different issues. Yeah, and then during the pandemic, a lot of online mental health services started off, right? And so we talked a lot about ethical issues. And then recently as well, we were discussing in another forum about mental health stigma and what it really involves. So people were having open conversations, and it was from different perspectives of a mental health advocate, a clinical psychologist, and psychiatrist. So just to show you that this is something we're excited about, we don't just preach it, we actually live it. We actually talk about it and we promote it. Yeah. So I've come to the end. Yeah. Just to recap, I've just covered an overview of what professionalism and ethical responsiveness looks like. I've talked about how we need to integrate ethical competence education into actual practice. I've also mentioned about some reflection-based learning, so the practices that we can use. And finally, how can we empower students in an ongoing process? So the conclusion is simply that, as a healthcare professionals, it's always juggling between learning how to balance that. You're not just healing the human body, and for a psychologist, human mind as well. But at the same time, we need to remember we are always, first and foremost, not harming others. Okay? So these are my references.
Thank you, Dr. Serena. Yes.
Thank you, Rika.
Thank you, Dr. Serena. That was a really interesting and thoughtful lecture and very insightful. So I learned a lot. I personally learned a lot from that, and I recognize several papers that I've also currently reading. And
Oh,
so I couldn't agree more with your points and highlight about the psychological safety when we're having this reflective discussion. I really agree how it's really important. The dialogue in
yeah,
ethics discussion is really, really crucial
exactly.
strategies.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So that's really interesting. I would want to invite, I think we should invite some
Sure.
comments, maybe thoughts and experience questions from the audience. Bapak dan Ibu, kami persilahkan apabila ada yang ingin memberikan tanggapan dan ingin menyampaikan sharing mungkin pengalaman. Oke, saya melihat ada yang raise hand. So I see one participant is raising hand. So I would like to invite the participants. Kami persilahkan untuk Ibu Wahyu Dewi. Ini Mbak Ririn bukan ya?
Iya, betul.
Oke, saya mengenali. So I recognize this this audience. This is one of our partners as well. So Mbak Ririn atau Bu Wahyu Dewi, kami persilahkan. Would you like to directly speak with Dr. Serena in English, or would you want me to help facilitate?
Oke, thank you very much Bu Wika, dan salam hormat untuk seluruh fakulti member di CBMH FKKMK UGM. And thank you very much also for Dr. Serena for your insightful and also important information. I learned a lot from your information, and I absolutely agree that ethical education is very important, because it will give many positive insight for us to increase our awareness and also to give more perspective in different situation. And I would like to ask about the competencies of student. So is there any difference competencies among level degree of education? I mean, maybe in a bachelor or in master or in more advanced degree, is there any different competencies that they have to have? So if yes, maybe you can explain more, maybe the boundaries or maybe the states of competencies in each level degree, because I believe we have to learn this not only in a basic education, but also until maybe in the highest level. So maybe is there any stage of competencies? Thank you very much, Dr. Serena. Terima
Most
kasih.
welcome. Yeah, thank you. Can I respond in English?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
So,
sure.
yeah, it's a great question. Basically, okay, it's a multifaceted question as well, because it depends on the profession you're in, okay? But ultimately, I know that each profession has their own ethical code, right? Their ethical guidelines. So depending on which profession you're in, you have to go by that. That would be the main guide. But the context is also the setup that you're in. So in that institution or workplace, organization that you're in, there would probably be some policy about that spells out what kind of guidelines, right? And then also a lot of the educational institutions in the training process would have referred to some international guidelines, right? Like I mentioned, so it could be American Medical Association or British Medical Association, depending on the authorities that are referred to. So all these being taken into consideration, if you're asking me the differences, I think it's related to the expectation of the role. So if you're a graduate, or if you're a specialist, or if you're a nurse or a dietitian, or a different one, depending on your role, the competencies may vary a little bit. But if you're talking about ethical principles, I think they are quite universal. Things like integrity, justice, beneficence, non-maleficence, honesty, all these are quite universal across many healthcare professions. Yeah. And then you asked about boundaries. The boundaries would be very much related to the scope of your work. So that one lies in what the definition of your profession's job scope involves. So that would be the boundaries of what you can and cannot do. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
But it's somewhat universal. Yeah. In that sense, a lot of the values and principles are quite universal.
Oh yeah, and it's also depend on the profession itself. Yeah.
Correct.
Doctor.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome. If you ask me, it never hurt to take on, you know how there are different guidelines and different organizations or bodies, authorities have slightly different guidelines. Some parts may differ a little bit, right? So if you ask me, it never hurt to take on the more conservative one as well. So if, let's say, one place says you need to do this for 5 years, or another place says you need to do this for 6 years. So of course, with discussion, right, of your local context, it never hurt to take on a little bit more conservative as well, if you're not sure. Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's. Thank you, Mbak Ririn. So we usually address her as Mbak Ririn, but her full name is So we address her as part of her names that we know her as Mbak Ririn. Yeah. So Mbak Ririn is she's a nurse. She's a practicing nurse.
I see.
So I think it's really it's interesting that I think the highlight from your response, Dr. Serena, that we recognize this as a universal need and importance for ethics for healthcare practitioners. But then we do know that we have our own responsibility and our own roles in healthcare healthcare services. So that's why that makes it, despite the universal norms or maybe guidelines, but then we have our context, and then the problems, the situation that we are facing is going to be very unique to our own professions. And then also the levels of if you're a student, medical students, and then if you're a nursing students, and then maybe if you're an intern or studying psychology, clinical psychology. So that would make it really adding more complication and intricateness. So I think I'm also going to write on that question, actually, like maybe if you can clarify, or maybe if you can help. Do you agree? Like if I see from your lecture, I see that the reflection, being able to have awareness and ability to have this routine self-reflection, critical reflection about our own moral situations, moral dilemma that we face in our practice. Can we say that that's the basic and like the basic skills in that makes up a huge part of ethical competence? Is about how good are we in doing our reflection?
Exactly. Yes.
Do you agree to that? I mean,
definitely
I
agree.
have a sense that. Okay.
Yes.
So can you elaborate more on tips or strategies? How can we start advocating this, or do you have any special tricks in your field? Because I think in this kind of skills and doing reflection, I think the psychological insights is really important, but not everybody, maybe not all medical faculty, like myself, I'm not equipped with how to guide students on doing like a proper reflection so that it really is authentic and genuine to themselves. So like, do you have any more comments on that?
Thank you for that question. So, wow, where to start? So much to say. Okay, I'll try to be concise. Just now I mentioned about how the whole reflection process and ethics education should not be done in, silo, right? Individually. It also helps to learn it's through the learning together with other people, right? The interaction with one another that sparks more thinking. So ideally, we assume that process of dialoguing, right? Interacting with one another helps develop the ability to have self-awareness, because we are only aware of ourselves as much as what we know, as well as what the external world feeds back to us, right? The feedback given from the external world. So that's where the supervision process. So in clinical psychology training, as an example, there's a lot of close supervision where the supervisor will journey with the trainees about their work. So a lot of skills training specific to the industry. At the same time, there's a lot of ethical considerations and their responses. So how that individual responds to a particular scenario, ethical situation, dilemma, would reflect on what they're thinking. And so it's that supervising involves sussing out their values and their thought process. And we are able to kind of tell if someone is not very self-aware. So then we'll have more dialogue to give feedback on that. Now, in the first place, then how do we as the clinical supervisor, as an example, know that we ourselves are self-aware? So it's kind of like a journey where in your training throughout, it's like an intentional learning outcome where we promote that kind of reflection, right? Reflection in action and reflection on action throughout the learning process. So that is something that's needed. However, if we notice that a particular student or professional is somehow not able to see, we call these blind spots, yeah? Not able to capture or understand things more holistically, more honestly as well, then sometimes we actually do recommend for, I never hesitate to recommend healthcare professionals and students to actually go for their own personal counseling and therapy, because it's through your conversation with another professional, right? Mental health professional, you can actually process your own thoughts and fears, and that can reveal a lot about whether you're quite aware or not. Yeah. So does that help?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Serena. So I think I was thrown out of this Zoom for a couple of seconds, but I think I hope I get your points. Like I catch some parts of your points in the beginning and then also on the last. So I think, do you agree that in order for us to be able to facilitate that safe psychosocial situation so that they can have their authentic reflection and aware of themselves, but you also mentioned that we as the facilitators, as the lecturer or the instructor, we have to have our own awareness as well, so that we can recognize whether or not they're aware.
Right. So the obligation, right, the responsibility actually lies within the profession for each one to look out for one another, actually. So that's why it's like a spirit, a spirit of having ethical behaviors and just professionalism conduct all throughout.
Yes.
Yeah,
it's going to be very hard and heavy if it lies on to like individually. So it has to be done collectively so that we are used to that. We are used to doing that collectively. So thank you for your points. So I see one of our audience have already raised their hands. Dr. Sofan.
Hai.
Selamat siang.
Selamat siang, bisa dengar?
Ya, bisa didengar, Dr. Sofan. Apakah mau menyampaikan
Saya masih
ke Dr. Serena atau
boleh.
saya fasilitasi, Dok?
Saya pakai bahasa Indonesia saja ya.
Ya.
Jadi saya di dalam mobil nih. Pertama pertanyaannya adalah, kalau saya baca namanya adalah International Medical University. Pertanyaannya, apakah memberikan suatu etik atau moral dari negara-negara yang kuliah di situ dengan daerah asalnya? Kedua, apakah kampus ini dekat dengan Universitas Malaya Kuala Lumpur? Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Dr. Sofan, tapi agak kurang jelas tadi pertanyaan yang pertama tentang memberikan kuliah apa ya, Dok? Tadi sempat agak terputus suaranya.
Namanya International Medical University kan?
Iya, institusi.
Semoga mahasiswa teknologi yang lainnya. Nah, apakah kampus ini memberikan suatu tambahan keilmuan etik dari daerah lain? Terima kasih.
Apakah memberikan tambahan kuliah tentang etik dari daerah lain?
Ya misalkan ada Jawa gitu.
Oh, lokal ya?
Mahasiswa dari Jawa gitu kan, kuliah di sana. Apakah ada tambahan moral Jawa segala macam gitu?
Oke.
Monggo.
Iya, Terima kasih Dr. Sofan. Itu yang pertama. Yang kedua
Habis
tadi
ini.
pertanyaan tentang apa dok yang Malaya tadi? Apakah ada
kampusnya dekat dengan Universitas Malaya Kuala Lumpur?
Oke. Ya, baik.
Kampusnya apakah dekat dengan
Kampusnya apakah dekat
Ya.
dengan
Ya.
Universitas Malaya di Kuala
Ya.
Lumpur? Oke. Ya.
Iya.
Terima
Soalnya
kasih
saya
Dokter.
mau ke Kuala Lumpur. Ya,
Oh,
mohon,
Dokter
ya.
Sofan mau ke Kuala Lumpur. Oke, Dok.
Iya.
Semoga nanti
gitu.
ketemu. Saya tanyakan ya, Dok.
Oh, welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, terima kasih. Thank you, Dr. Sofan. So Dr. Sofan is one of our frequent partners as well. So he's the frequent partners in our networks in bioethics. So he's joined our courses and very active in our networks. So so maybe you catch a little bit about Dr. Sofan's two questions. So maybe from the last question, the shorter one. So Dr. Sofan was asking that because he's planning a trip to Malaysia, maybe to Kuala Lumpur. So he's asking, maybe is your campus, International Medical University, was it somehow close to the University of Malaya in Kuala Lumpur?
About maybe 10 kilometers.
10 kilometers. So
roughly,
so it's not far.
Not too far.
Not too far. Okay. And so the first
Inshallah, I
question.
will be there.
Inshallah visit ya, Dok. So maybe we can arrange something maybe to meet colleagues there in the International Medical University. So the first question is interesting. Dr. Sofan is asking, so maybe because your university is titled International Medical University. So, but do you also have somehow the contents of ethics education which accommodate or introduce students about the local values, maybe the cultural, how the cultural, maybe the local values influence that? Was that also taught in the ethics education?
Okay.
Considering the name,
I can speak for the psychology program. The medical program, I don't dare to give the answer. I'm not too sure. So my colleagues, if you're able to, from IMU, if you're here, you're able to help out, please do. For the psychology program, it's we have a Bachelor of Psychology. We also have a Master of Counseling and a Master of Clinical Psychology. So curriculum-wise, it will incorporate international authorities guidelines on ethics, but also incorporates the local authority. So for the counselors, there's the Counseling Board of Malaysia. So where we're practicing, we definitely have to incorporate that. For the psychologists, we take the American one, we take the British one, we take the Australian one. We also have the Malaysian Society of Clinical Psychology as an example. So for I think overall, it's in the curriculum, there will be incorporation of that, but it's in the practice, right? The practice sessions when students go for their clinical placement, their industrial training, that's when they will have to adapt all these knowledge, integrate it as well into the local context. So we will take into consideration, of course, our Malaysian culture. So one topic that comes to mind is the concept of like gift giving, giving and receiving gifts from patients. So that's one common thing that needs to consider the local context, right? Patients giving food to, let's say, the providers, whether it's acceptable in some cultures when it's not. Things like that.
Because we cannot avoid that. We have to accommodate, and because that's in the daily practice, daily context that the practitioners are facing, right?
Right.
And so I think also, again, I'm going to write on a little bit on that question as well. So what is your comment, or what do you think, is it something that is also being the point of interest in Malaysia, or maybe in your institution, about the discourses around there's no such thing about international ethics or global ethics, but so there, I mean, what is your opinion on that? Or maybe more specifically, is there any specific analysis or studies around developing the maybe the Asian ethics, or maybe Islamic ethics? Something is more dedicated about specific to the population. I mean, what's the situation there?
That's great. I don't have an update on that, but I do believe I've heard that there are different researchers and respective parties that are looking into developing something like that. Whether or not it's reached a stage where it has actually been validated, and cross-checked and accepted is another thing. But I do believe that many have actually, I think even a smaller scale, maybe some small institutions or organizations may have developed their own version, but whether it becomes something generalizable to the whole Malaysian population, I don't think I'm aware of any just yet. But again, for psychology side, the Malaysian Society of Clinical Psychology has attempted to do a Malaysian version that has adapted from the different one that is somewhat accepted among the practitioners in Malaysia. Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for the insight.
Yeah.
We have another. Our participants are raising hand. I would like to invite. Is this Prof. Shafa SAA? Because this is in initial. This is Prof. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Dr. Saifuddin Ali Ahmad. Okay, because I only see your initials and I didn't see your camera is off. So, Dr. Saifuddin, kami persilahkan. Mungkin mau langsung buka mic. Yeah. Okay. Now I recognize Dr. Saifuddin. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Nice to join this discussion. My question about the level of professionalism. Firstly, about the personal character as individual, and the second one about the leadership as part of member of organization of professional, and the last one is the leader in the society at large. So, what are your experience to increase the professionalism from the level of individual as personal character until the society as a leader in the society? Maybe in the IMU there is an experience for education to increase the level of professionalism. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saifuddin. So, Dr. Serena, would you like to directly respond to that?
Yeah, I hope I understood the question correctly. So you're asking about my comment on professionalism at a personal level, right? From a personal character perspective, and then secondly, at a as a member in a professional setting.
Organization level,
Yeah. And then finally, for the leader, society at large. Well, those are hard questions. I mean, you need quite a bit of answer. Well, firstly, personal character is a tricky one, isn't it? Because that's why I covered the part on moral behavior, right? As a compass, like having a common idea and understanding of what it looks like to have character that is in line with moral behavior. And I know this is a very tricky subject because it's not like it's always black or white. There's a lot of gray as well, right? So to me, it takes an effort to be a person, wanting to be a person of good moral behavior and integrity as becoming part of one's own characteristics and values. So it's like you and your professional identity kind of become the same. It becomes congruent rather than separate. So the personal characteristics over time, to me, an authentic, ethical person is like it's blended together with their personal characteristics. It's in line with the ethical principle. Does that make sense? Yeah. And secondly, if at the society level, in the leadership and the membership, I'm not so clear what angle you want me to comment on.
So is it
meaning that we have a community, right? Not only organization as a member of professional organization, but also as a member of society, and we should make a contribution to our society, right? Maybe in medical.
So how do you?
Yeah.
So how do we as a maybe professional members of
Uh-huh.
in the society, how do we share that value and literacy and awareness about ethics? Is that what the question is?
Yeah.
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 So is there
Yeah.
any specific program or efforts dedicated to like really somehow empower the society in large,
Yeah.
so that the awareness of ethics and moral characters are
Yep.
really increased?
Yeah, that's a great question. So thank you for clarifying. So I would say it's bringing the education out of the classroom, right? So if these discussions, as I mentioned, these open dialogues are happening in the classroom in a specific setting, if you want to bring it to the larger society, it's having open and public forums and conversations about these things, so that actually consumers, patients are all aware as well about their rights. So actually, you've given me more ideas now. So for example, I'm actually my department, in collaboration with a few NGOs, are actually having a forum next month as well, and that's open to the public, and we'll be talking about burnout among healthcare professionals. So that's the topic, and we're inviting both healthcare professionals and also the public to sit in on this forum and the discussion. So things like that, I think regular awareness events as well, so that it's not just the professionals, but also being accountable to the public, right? About what ethical behavior should look like in the healthcare profession. Yeah, that's very important.
Okay, thank you. So apakah itu menjawab, Dok?
Ya, terima
Dengan
kasih.
okay, thank you, Dr. Saifuddin. So I
Oh,
think
may I add one more? Actually, I just
sure.
thought of it. And if you mentioned about leadership, right? At the society level, it's also being able, as a profession or a group of professionals and students, to be able to call out on unethical behavior, even for leadership, right? So it takes a lot of courage, but because people are accountable at different levels, like grievances will be taken seriously. So if having that accessibility for the public or even other professionals to have a grievance process to report on unethical behavior and disciplinary action being taken, all those are very, very crucial. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So encouraging the active participation of the society to be able to make feedbacks on that, on maybe specific experience that they have, that they feel like it's unacceptable, maybe.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So that also will have provide us with good feedbacks, about how our profession is viewed or perceived in the society. Okay. Thank you so much. I think that's also a great question. And I see another hand is raised. So I would like to provide the opportunity for Tulasi Mani. So I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, excellent. Thank you very much. I think you got my, very seldom they get my name correct, but you got it really absolutely correct. Thank you so much.
Thank God. I'm concerned that I do not pronounce it correctly.
Yeah,
so would
thank
you
you
like to speak directly?
Yeah, I just would like to add on to what Dr. Serena has shared. Actually, excellent sharing, Dr. Serena. Thank you so much. Regarding few questions that they were asking on the professionalism, about leadership and things like that. I'm also teaching in IMU. We are teaching Mata Pelajaran Umum, where we have these two modules, philosophy and current issues, and also penghayatan etika dan peradaban, where we integrate a lot of cultural and philosophical beliefs and everything to the students. And we have, students from different culture, from different background, from different religion, international students, local students. And the topic covers actually all kinds of philosophers, from those days till now. And also we speak about different religions as well. So we have to really keep to our professionalism because of this ethical, and keep our ethics really well there, because we don't want to offend any of the students. So here we really have to practice. The lecturers under this program, we actually we tell them according to the syllabus how this is, but then at the end of the day, we have to learn how to respect other cultures. You can give opinions, but you're not actually supposed to condemn other beliefs or religions. So this is where we have to keep our ethics and professionalism really at a higher level. So because students can give a lot of background stories, so I think here the lecturers play a real big role there, in terms of their professionalism, and we open feedback. We open for people to give their feedback. At the same time, like I said, we encourage them to speak, but not to condemn anyone. So yeah, we have these two modules where we really have to integrate all this in, because we all come from different culture and beliefs and all. So yes, so these modules are actually compulsory for all undergraduate students in the university, actually in public and also private higher education in Malaysia.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you to Lassie, for reminding me about that compulsory module for all the programs, actually.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Serena. Thank you,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sulasina Simani, for adding on that. So I'm happy. We are so happy to hear this exchange, so that we learn from each other, and especially we learn about what efforts have been made in your country, in your institution. And I think that's also a great thing that we have this dialogue. So we also next time, because time is limited, next time I think we'll have another opportunity so that we can share more and discuss more deeper about this. And so yeah, because time is very limited and the discussion has been really going, I think, really deep and very insightful. But because the time has already showed that it's 10 to 3, and Dr. Serena has been actually over time from our invitation. We are inviting. I'm just aware that we invited you until 2:30, and it's already past that. So would you all like to have final comments so that we can wrap up the session? Thank you for sharing everything.
Thank you. I really appreciate everyone's time here. I only wish we could meet each other in person. My last words is really just keep this conversation going. It shouldn't be like one lecture, right? It should trigger more discussions and conversation, and that would make me happy in knowing that one of my objectives are served. That we continue this. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Serena. I think our aim has already been achieved, even though time is limited. But we have a fruitful discussion, I believe, and I hope this is also useful for everyone, for our international audience as well as our national audience. And so we shall meet again at another time, another opportunity, and I hope you stay healthy and you will have a fruitful discussion as well in your maybe next activity. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing your expertise and experience. Terima kasih Bapak dan Ibu. Dengan demikian kami cukupkan untuk sesi Rabuan kali ini. So if you would like to leave first, Dr. Serena, we are okay. I'll just wrap up if you're going to move to another activity. Thank you for staying with us.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yes, I'll just have a very
Serena.
short announcement. So thank you for our audience for staying with us, and thank you for contributing into such a great discussion. So I think we have a very small announcement to make, short one before we end this session. Our Wednesday forum for next week are going to be about tube feeding in dementia at the end of life from an Islamic perspective. We will have our speaker, Dr. Hadi Lababidi, with the moderator, Dr. Nur Azid Mahardinata. So stay tuned for our next session next week, same time, same day. We will meet you again, another international session with international speaker. Terima kasih Bapak dan Ibu yang sudah berpartisipasi. Semoga bermanfaat, semoga kita semua diberikan kesehatan dan kesuksesan. Selamat siang.
Selamat siang. Thank you, Dr. Tika.
Terima kasih, Prof. Yati.
Hai. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Miss you.
Thank you.